Every man rejected. The 60-year-old widow. For being too old, until a broken rancher made her feel more desired than she ever did at 20. Martha Sullivan had learned to recognize rejection in a man's eyes, the way they'd glance at her silver-streaked hair, then quickly look away as if 60 years had stripped her of every right to be seen, to be wanted, to still feel a woman's longing for touch. Every man rejected the 60-year-old widow for being too old, their excuses polite, but their meaning clear. Widows her age should fade quietly into their kitchens and knitting, not dare to hope for desire again. Just yesterday, James Mitchell had actually patted her hand like she was his grandmother when she'd smiled at him outside the church, and Thomas Wade had stammered that she deserved respect, as if respect was meant to keep her warm at night, as if her late husband's grave had buried her heart along with his body. But standing on the auction platform in front of the entire town of Willow Creek, about to sell her late husband's cattle and goods because she couldn't run the ranch alone, Martha felt every pair of eyes on her, not with desire, but with pity. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the crowd, lot after lot sold to men who wouldn't meet her gaze, and she'd never felt more invisible, more past her time, more utterly unseen. Until Coleman Drake, the broken rancher everyone whispered about, the man who'd lost everything to grief and bad luck, whose own ranch was dying, who hadn't smiled since his wife's death 3 years ago, suddenly stepped forward from the crowd. And before Martha could process what was happening, before the gasps could fully leave the townspeople's mouths, Coleman swept her up into his arms right there on that platform, holding her like she weighed nothing, like she was precious, his dark eyes burning into hers with something that made her breath catch. Not pity, not politeness, but raw, aching want. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers, fingers pointing, mouths agape, Coleman Drake carrying Martha Sullivan like a bride, a broken man claiming a woman they'd all deemed too old to claim. But Coleman didn't look at them, he only looked at her. And in that moment, Martha felt something she hadn't felt in decades, something her husband had never quite stirred in her even at 20, utterly, powerfully, dangerously desired. "Put me down," Martha whispered, though her arms had already wrapped around his neck without permission from her pride. "Coleman, what are you—" "I'm buying everything," he said loud enough for the whole town to hear, his voice rough as gravel but steady as bedrock. "The cattle, the land, the equipment, all of it. Name your price." The auctioneer stammered, confused. The crowd went silent. Martha's heart hammered so hard she thought everyone could hear it. "You don't have that kind of money," she breathed. Everyone knew Coleman was one bad season from losing his own place. His jaw tightened, and something fierce flashed in those dark eyes. "I'll find it. I'll work it off. I'll do whatever it takes." He lowered his voice so only she could hear. "Just don't leave Willow Creek. Don't let them make you disappear." 3 weeks earlier, Martha had stood in this exact spot beside her husband's casket, listening to the preacher talk about Henry Sullivan like he'd been some kind of saint. Patient Henry, steady Henry, reliable Henry who'd given her 35 years of comfortable monotony and 3 beautiful children, and a life so predictable she could have walked through it with her eyes closed. The whole town had patted her shoulder and told her what a blessing it was that she'd had such a good man, such a long marriage. No one asked if she'd been happy. No one wondered if maybe, just maybe, she'd spent 3 decades being seen as capable and useful and respectable, but never once as desirable. Never once looked at the way Coleman was looking at her right now, like she was something precious he'd die before letting slip away. Henry had been a good man, but he'd married her because she was strong enough to work a ranch and sensible enough not to expect romance. He'd never carried her anywhere, never looked at her like his world would end if she walked away. "Why?" she whispered to Coleman, searching his face for the trick, the pity, the charitable gesture she'd learned to expect from men. "Why would you do this?" The muscle in his jaw worked. Dust swirled around them both, and the whole town held its breath. "Because I've been alone in a crowded room for 3 years, Coleman said quietly. "And the only time I don't feel like I'm drowning is when I watch you walk down Main Street with your head high, refusing to shrink just because they want you to. Because you're the strongest damn woman I've ever seen. And if one more fool in this town treats you like you're past your prime, I'm going to lose my mind." He paused, and something vulnerable cracked through his voice. "And because when you smiled at me last month outside the Mercantile, just smiled, nothing more, I felt something I thought died with my wife. I felt like maybe I could be a man again instead of just a ghost." Martha's breath caught. She remembered that day. She'd been carrying flour and sugar, and Coleman had held the door. She'd smiled to thank him. That was all. Just a smile. but he'd remembered. He'd seen her. The auctioneer cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mr. Drake, do you have the funds to— I'll work it out with Mrs. Sullivan privately," Coleman said, still holding Martha like she was made of something more valuable than gold. "That acceptable to you, Martha?" And there it was. The question beneath the question, not just about the ranch, about everything. Martha looked into his eyes and saw her own loneliness reflected back. Two people the world had decided were finished, used up, not worth the trouble anymore. She thought about her daughter. Rebecca's letter sitting on her kitchen table, already planning to move Martha to Denver, to a little apartment where she could rest and be taken care of, and slowly fade into wallpaper. She thought about the way the widows at church talked about their lives being over at 50, at 60, as if being a woman meant having an expiration date stamped on your heart. And then she thought about the way Coleman's hands held her, carefully but firmly, like she was real and present and very much alive. "Yes," Martha said, and watched something like hope dawn across Coleman's broken features. "That's acceptable to me." The crowd exploded into scandalized chatter, but Coleman just smiled, the first real smile she'd seen on his face in 3 years, and carefully set her back on her feet, though his hand lingered at her waist like he couldn't quite bear to let go completely. "I'll come by tomorrow," he said. "We'll talk terms." "Terms," Martha repeated, and felt a flutter in her stomach she hadn't felt since she was 16. "Tomorrow, then." He tipped his hat and walked back through the parting crowd like Moses through the Red Sea, leaving Martha standing alone on that platform with her heart racing and her hands trembling and the whole town staring at her like she'd just committed some kind of crime. Sarah Henderson leaned over to Agnes Porter. "Well, I never. A woman her age making a spectacle." But Martha didn't hear the rest, because for the first time in 60 years she didn't care what they thought. For the first time in her entire life, someone had looked at her and seen not what she could do or how useful she could be or how respectable she appeared, but her. Just her. And wanted her anyway. Scene 2. Coleman showed up at dawn the next morning, before the town gossips could gather their courage to come knocking on Martha's door with their concerned faces and poisoned advice. She watched him ride up the dirt path to her ranch, his horse moving slow and steady, and her hands shook so badly she had to set down the coffee pot before she dropped it. 60 years old, and her palms were sweating like a schoolgirl's. It was ridiculous. It was terrifying. It was the most alive she'd felt in decades. She opened the door before he could knock. "You're early," she said, and hated how breathless she sounded. "Couldn't sleep." Coleman took off his hat, and in the soft morning light she could see the lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair, the weariness that came from too many nights alone with your grief. "Kept thinking you might change your mind. About selling the ranch? About letting me buy it?" He met her eyes. "About yesterday." Martha's heart did something complicated in her chest. "Come in. I made coffee." Her kitchen was small and neat, everything in its place the way Henry had always insisted. Coleman filled the doorway, and suddenly the room felt different, smaller but not suffocating, intimate instead of lonely. He sat at her table without being asked, like he belonged there, and accepted the coffee cup she offered with hands that had scars across the knuckles and calluses that told stories of hard work and harder times. "I need to be honest with you," Martha said, sitting across from him. "I know you don't have the money to buy this place. Everyone knows the bank's breathing down your neck about your own ranch." Coleman's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "I'll find a way." "Why?" She leaned forward, searching his face. "Why would you risk everything for my land? It doesn't make sense, Coleman. Unless—" She stopped, afraid to say it out loud. "Unless what?" "Unless this isn't really about the ranch at all." The silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. Outside, a rooster crowed. The coffee pot ticked as it cooled. Coleman stared down at his cup like it held answers. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said finally. "Cancer. Took 8 months, and I watched her fade a little more every day until there was nothing left but pain and bones and me holding her hand, useless as a fence post." His voice cracked, just barely. "We had 22 years together, good years mostly. But you know what she told me right before the end? She said, 'Coleman, you married me because I was pretty and young, and I looked good on your arm. You loved me, I know you did. But you never needed me. Not the way a man should need a woman.'" Martha's throat tightened. "I didn't understand what she meant," Coleman continued. "Not then. But after she died, I realized she was right. I'd chosen her like you'd choose a nice horse, for how she looked, how she fit into my life, how she made other men jealous. I never saw past the surface, never looked deep enough to see who she really was. He finally raised his eyes to Martha's, and she knew it. She spent 22 years being beautiful and useful and perfect, and she knew I never really saw her. Coleman, but you, he said it fierce, almost angry. Martha, I see you. I see how you wake up every morning and work this ranch alone even though your back hurts and your hands ache and everyone in town thinks you should just give up and fade away. I see how you hold your head high when they whisper about you at church, how you smile at their pity and their judgment like it doesn't cut you to pieces. I see the way you check on old Mr. Peterson even though he's mean as a snake, and how you slipped money into the collection plate when the Morton family lost their barn, and how you pretend not to notice when people talk about you like you're already dead. His hands clenched around the coffee cup. I see you, Martha. All of you. And what I see is the strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. Martha's eyes burned. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Not Henry, not anyone. I'm 60 years old, she whispered. I'm gray and wrinkled and my body doesn't... Do you know what I see when I look at you? Coleman interrupted. He stood up, came around the table, and knelt beside her chair. Actually knelt, like he was proposing or praying or both. I see a woman who's lived a whole life and survived it. I see strength in those lines around your eyes, wisdom in that gray hair. I see hands that have worked hard and loved hard and built something real. He took those hands in his thumbs tracing her calloused palms. I see a woman who's been invisible too long. And Martha, I swear to you, you are the most visible thing in my world. When you walk into a room, I can't see anything else. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. I don't need your ranch, Coleman said softly. I need you. I need to wake up knowing you're still in this town, still breathing the same air. I need to see you on Sundays and Tuesdays, and every day in between. And if buying your ranch is the only way to keep you here, to give you a reason to stay, then I'll sell my soul to make it happen. You can't, Martha breathed. You can't afford it. You'll lose everything. I've already lost everything that mattered, Coleman said. Losing money and land, that's nothing. Losing the chance to see what this could be? He shook his head. That's the only loss I can't survive. Martha stared at him, this broken man on his knees in her kitchen, offering her something she'd stopped believing existed. Not just love, not just desire, but being truly, completely seen. Being wanted for exactly who she was, wrinkles and all. My daughter's coming, she said abruptly. Rebecca, she's arriving on the noon stage. She's going to try to convince me to move to Denver, to leave Willow Creek. She swallowed hard. She thinks I'm too old to live alone, too old to manage, too old to choose your own life, Coleman finished. Yes? What do you want, Martha? Not what Rebecca wants, not what the town thinks you should want. You. And there it was. The question no one had asked her in 60 years. What did Martha Sullivan want? She looked at this man kneeling before her, this broken rancher, who saw her like no one else ever had. She thought about her daughter's well-meaning concern that felt like a cage, about the town's pitying glances that made her feel like a ghost, about Henry's 35 years of comfortable indifference that she'd mistaken for contentment. And then she thought about yesterday, being swept up in Coleman's arms in front of everyone, feeling desired and precious and powerfully, dangerously alive. I want to feel like this, she whispered, like I matter, like I'm more than just useful or respectable. I want to be seen. Coleman's eyes blazed. Then let me see you, every day. Let me prove to you that 60 isn't too old for anything. Not for being wanted, not for being desired, not for being loved so hard it makes up for every year you went without it. He stood, pulling her up. With him, and Martha's breath caught as he stepped closer. She could smell leather and sage and something else, something masculine and warm that made her dizzy. I don't have much to offer, Coleman said roughly. I'm in debt, my ranch is falling apart, and this whole town thinks I'm crazy. But I promise you this, Martha Sullivan, if you give me a chance, I will make you feel more desired than you ever did at 20. I will look at you every morning like you're a miracle, and I will never, ever let you be invisible again. His hand came up to cup her cheek, calloused and gentle, and Martha leaned into it without thinking. When was the last time someone had touched her face like this, like she was something precious? Coleman, she breathed. Say yes, he whispered, not to selling the ranch, to this, to us, say yes. And Martha, 60-year-old widow Martha, who everyone had written off, who'd spent decades being practical and sensible and invisible, looked into Coleman Drake's eyes and saw her future there, uncertain and terrifying and absolutely full of life. Before she could answer, horses thundered up the drive. Lots of them. Coleman pulled back, his jaw tightening as they both moved to the window. Martha's heart sank. Rebecca had arrived early, but she hadn't come alone. She'd brought her husband Charles, a lawyer from Denver, and, Martha's stomach dropped, Sheriff Morrison and 2 of the town council members. "Oh God," Martha whispered. Coleman's hand found hers and squeezed. "Whatever this is, we face it together. You hear me?" Rebecca climbed down from the carriage in her expensive Denver dress, her face set in that determined expression Martha knew too well, the look that said her daughter had already decided what was best and wouldn't be argued with. "Mama," Rebecca called, marching toward the door. "We need to talk now." Coleman looked at Martha. "What do you want to do?" And Martha realized this was it. The moment everything changed. She could let Rebecca take her away to safety and respectability and slow invisibility in Denver. Or she could fight for this wild, impossible, beautiful thing Coleman was offering. She squeezed his hand back. "I want to fight." Coleman smiled, fierce and proud, and something else that made Martha's stomach flip. "Then let's give them something to talk about." He opened the door before Rebecca could knock, standing in the doorway like a wall between Martha and the world that wanted to decide her life for her. "Mrs. Sullivan isn't receiving visitors right now," Coleman said calmly. Rebecca's eyes went wide, then narrowed. "Step aside, Mr. Drake. I'm here to see my mother." "Your mother's a grown woman," Coleman replied. "She can decide who she sees. This is a family matter. Then you should have treated her like family instead of a problem to be managed." Coleman's voice stayed level, but there was steel underneath. "Now, unless Martha invites you in, you can wait out here." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Mr. Drake, we don't want any trouble. Mrs. Sullivan's daughter has some concerns about her welfare?" Martha stepped forward, her hand still in Coleman's. "I'm standing right here, Sheriff Morrison. If you have concerns, you can address them to me directly instead of talking around me like I'm simple." Rebecca's face flushed. "Mama, please, we're just worried about you. After the spectacle yesterday, and now," she gestured at Coleman, "you barely know this man. People are saying he's taking advantage of you in your grief. People have been saying I'm too old, too weak, and too worn out to matter since Henry died," Martha said quietly. "I'm done listening to what people say." "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Rebecca said, her voice rising. "You're not thinking clearly. The grief, the isolation, it's making you vulnerable to being treated like a woman instead of a burden," Martha interrupted. "To being desired instead of pitied, to feeling alive instead of waiting to die." The words hung in the air like thunder. Rebecca's lawyer husband stepped forward. "Mrs. Sullivan, we've prepared some paperwork, a power of attorney for your protection. Given your age and recent emotional state, it would allow Rebecca to help manage your affairs." "No," Martha said. "Mama." "No," Martha repeated louder. "I am 60 years old, not 60 years senile. I own this ranch. I make my own decisions, and I am not signing away my life because my daughter thinks I'm too old to know my own mind." "This is his influence," Rebecca pointed at Coleman. "He's manipulating you. He's the first man in this town who's treated me like I still have value," Martha shot back. "The first man who's looked at me and seen a woman instead of a widow. And if that makes you uncomfortable, Rebecca, maybe you should ask yourself why a stranger shows me more respect than my own daughter." Rebecca's face crumpled. "I'm trying to protect you." "From what? From living? From feeling? From being wanted?" Martha's voice softened. "Sweetheart, I know you mean well, but your protection feels an awful lot like burial." The silence that followed was broken only by the wind rustling through the cottonwood trees and the distant lowing of cattle. Rebecca stood there, tears streaming down her cheeks, and Martha's heart twisted because she loved her daughter. Of course she did. But loving someone didn't mean letting them bury you alive in their good intentions. "I watched you fade for 35 years, Mama," Rebecca whispered. "I watched Papa treat you like furniture, useful furniture, but still, you were just there, always working, never dancing or laughing or being treated like you mattered beyond what you could do." She wiped her eyes. "When he died, I thought maybe you'd finally get to rest, finally get to just be. And instead you're here, alone, working yourself to death on this ranch." "I wasn't alone until 5 minutes ago," Martha said gently, squeezing Coleman's hand. "Rebecca, I know what you saw growing up. I know it wasn't the love story little girls dream about, but that doesn't mean my story is over. It just means maybe, finally, it's actually beginning. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Sullivan, if you're of sound mind, and you clearly are, then no one can force you to do anything you don't want to do. But your daughter's got a point about this ranch. It's a lot of work for one person. She won't be alone, Coleman said quietly. Every head turned toward him. What I said yesterday about buying the ranch, I meant it. Coleman looked at the assembled group. But I'll be honest with you all. I don't have the cash. My own place is mortgaged to the breaking point. What I do have is 2 strong hands, 20 years of ranching experience, and a willingness to work myself into the ground if that's what it takes. So you're proposing what exactly? Charles the lawyer asked skeptically. A partnership? A marriage, Coleman said. The world stopped. Martha's heart forgot how to beat. Rebecca gasped. The sheriff's eyebrows shot up. Even Charles looked stunned. Coleman, Martha started, but he turned to her, still holding her hand, his eyes burning with something that made her knees weak. I know we barely know each other, Coleman said. I know this is fast and crazy and probably the most impractical thing either of us could do. But Martha, I've spent 3 years being dead inside, and you've spent 60 years being invisible. I don't want to waste another day of whatever time we have left. His voice roughened. Marry me. Not because it's practical or because it solves your ranch problem or because it satisfies the town gossips. Marry me because when I look at you, I see my whole future, and when you look at me, you feel seen. Marry me because we both deserve to know what it's like to be chosen, really chosen, not settled for. This is insane, Rebecca cried. Mama, you can't possibly— Yes, Martha said. Coleman's eyes widened. Yes? Yes? Martha laughed, and it came out half sob, half joy. Yes, Coleman Drake, I will marry you. Because you're right, I am so tired of being invisible. I'm so tired of being sensible and practical and respectable while my life passes by like I'm already dead. I'm 60 years old, and for the first time in my entire life, I feel like I'm actually living. Coleman swept her into his arms, again, in front of everyone, and kissed her. Really kissed her, deep and claiming and full of promise, and Martha kissed him back with 60 years of longing she'd thought was buried with her youth. His mouth was warm and desperate, his hands gentle but urgent on her waist, and she felt it everywhere, this wild, reckless aliveness that made her understand, finally, what she'd been missing all those years with Henry. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the sheriff was clearing his throat awkwardly. Charles looked scandalized, and Rebecca was staring at her mother like she'd never seen her before. Mama, Rebecca whispered, you're glowing. And Martha realized it was true. She could feel it, this warmth radiating from somewhere deep in her chest, this fierce joy she'd thought only young women got to feel. This is what I needed, sweetheart, Martha said softly. Not rest, not protection, not a quiet apartment in Denver where I could fade away peacefully. I needed to be wanted, to be desired, to matter. She looked at Coleman, who was watching her like she'd hung the moon. He makes me feel more alive at 60 than I ever felt at 20. Rebecca's face crumpled again, but this time it was different. I never knew, she whispered. I never knew you felt that way. With Papa, I mean. I thought, your father was a good man, Martha said firmly. He gave me you and your brothers, and a good life by most measures. But good isn't the same as passionate. Safe isn't the same as seen. She reached out and took her daughter's hand. I don't blame him, and I don't regret my life. But I'm not dead yet, Rebecca, and I refuse to act like I am. Coleman cleared his throat. I don't have much to offer your mother, he said to Rebecca. My ranch is in debt. I've got more problems than solutions, and I'm probably too broken to be anybody's prize. But I promise you this, I will spend every day I have left making your mother feel like the most precious thing in my world. She will never wonder if she matters. She will never feel invisible, and she will never, ever be taken for granted. Rebecca studied him for a long moment, then looked at her mother, really looked at her, and seemed to see something she'd missed before. You really love him? She said wonderingly. You're actually in love. I think I might be, Martha admitted. Is that allowed at 60? I don't know, Rebecca said, and slowly, amazingly, she smiled. But I guess we're about to find out. She turned to Coleman. You hurt her, and I will come back here with my husband and a lawyer and make your life hell. Understood? Understood, Coleman said solemnly, but his eyes were dancing. And Mama, Rebecca added, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I treated you like you needed managing instead of asking what you needed. I'm sorry I assumed age meant you were done living. Martha pulled her daughter into a hug. You were trying to love me the best way you knew how. That's all any of us can do. The sheriff tipped his hat. Well, if there's no legal issue here, I think we're done. Congratulations, Mrs. Sullivan. Mr. Drake. He paused. Town's going to talk about this for years. Let them, Martha said, and felt Coleman's arm come around her waist, solid and sure. I'm done living for what other people think. As the group dispersed, Rebecca promising to return for the wedding, Charles looking bemused, the sheriff shaking his head but smiling, Martha and Coleman stood together in front of her little ranch house, the morning sun climbing higher, the day stretching ahead full of impossible possibilities. Are you sure about this? Coleman asked quietly. It won't be easy. Combining our ranches, dealing with the debt, facing the town gossip. Coleman Drake, Martha interrupted, turning to face him fully. I've spent 60 years doing what was easy, what was expected, what was safe. And you know what I have to show for it? A lot of respectability and very little joy. She reached up and cupped his weathered face in her hands. I don't want easy anymore. I want real. I want to wake up every morning next to a man who sees me. I want to feel desired and precious and fully, completely alive. I want whatever time I have left to actually mean something. It already means something, Coleman said roughly. You mean something. To me, you mean everything. And then he kissed her again, softer this time, sweeter, full of promise and hope and the kind of desire Martha had thought was reserved for young women in romance novels. But here it was, real and powerful and hers, this beautiful broken man who looked at her gray hair and lined face and saw not what she used to be, but everything she was and could still become. When they finally pulled apart, both smiling like fools, Martha realized something that made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. Every man had rejected the 60-year-old widow for being too old. Every man except the one who mattered, the one who saw past the number to the woman underneath, the one who made her feel not like she was reliving her 20s, but like she was discovering something even better, a love built on really seeing each other, scars and all. So, Coleman said, his forehead resting against hers, when should we get married? Tomorrow, Martha said recklessly. Why wait? Coleman laughed, a real laugh, full and rich and alive. Tomorrow it is. And standing there in the morning light, with her whole improbable future stretching ahead, Martha Sullivan finally understood what it meant to be truly desired, not for her youth or her beauty or her usefulness, but for exactly who she was, a 60-year-old woman who'd survived, who'd endured, who'd kept her strength and her dignity and her capacity for love even when the world told her she was finished. She wasn't finished. She was just beginning. And Coleman Drake, broken, imperfect, beautiful Coleman, was going to make sure she never forgot it. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Drop a comment below telling us your location. Are you watching from Texas, Nigeria, the UK, Australia? What does love and second chances mean to you? And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss another powerful story like this one. Your support means everything to us, and we can't wait to bring you more unforgettable tales of courage, redemption, and love that defies all expectations. See you in the next story.